What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Daniel Ortiz Rants at the Movie Podcast, the top rising movie podcast in the world. We made it. Hallelujah. We're on the second episode, and boy, there were some stinkers I had to sit through this week. I'll be reviewing more Netflix originals. What you expect? We're in the middle of a pandemic. What can I do, huh? There's nothing else I could do right now. So I'll be discussing John Henry, starring Terry Crews, The Wrong Missy with David Spade, and Capone 2020 with the great Tom Hardy. So let's get into it. So the first movie we'll be looking at is a Netflix original, the supposed action drama John Henry, starring Terry Crews, who you might know from films such as the Expendables franchise and Friday After Next, and also Chris Ludacris Bridges from countless rap hits, and more recently known for the Fast and the Furious franchise. And the film is directed by Will Forbes, who I wasn't familiar with at first, but after looking up his credits, I saw that this was actually his first feature-length film, and boy, it shows. So the premise is when two immigrant kids on the run from an LA gang leader, who happens to be John Henry's cousin, John is forced to reconcile with his past to give them a future. So that premise is as plain as it can be, and this movie really just is like that. It is a very plain movie. I was thoroughly disappointed with this film because I had high expectations for it. When Terry Crews mentioned that he was going to be starring in a movie called John Henry, I immediately went to the folklore of John Henry that was told to us when we were, in third and fourth grade about this railroad construction worker that was, plowing nails into the tracks. And they were going to go ahead and replace them with a machine. And John Henry pretty much said, hey, I can do this way faster than any machine. And, of course, they were like, that's impossible. But, they had a whole big contest around it. And basically what they did was have John Henry go against this machine and, go ahead and start plowing these nails into these tracks. And, it was just known that John Henry had this hammer and always carried it around with him. And when the competition started, John won. And, at the end, unfortunately, died because he put so much work into it that, his heart gave out on him. And I thought that was going to be such a dope premise for a movie that what we got is just very deflating and very lackluster. What we ended up getting was just more of a modern retelling, if you want to even call it that, because there was no retelling of the story. The only thing that they brought back from the folklore is the fact that he actually carried around the hammer. And they kind of replaced the hammer of steel with his hands instead. They said that he was just almost like a man of steel. So, he punched somebody and, shattered their jaw. And, spoiler coming up right now, there's a scene where he stomped on somebody and it instantly killed him. So this was the premise where they decided they wanted to go in this direction instead. And I think going back into the past and actually showing perseverance would have been stronger. This was not what I expected. So the character of John Henry came off being more of an imbecile. It felt like he wasn't the tough guy that we were expecting to see, the guy that walked around and, had his head held up high and, had confidence. This John Henry came off more of like insecure and quiet and meek. And that was extremely bothersome for me because that's not how I knew John Henry. If they did it for the film, and I understand sometimes you want to go ahead and put your own spin on it, that's okay. But this spin right here it was very weak. And the director was just all over the place with this movie. There was a couple of scenes of flashbacks that it just didn't make any sense to me. Like, we would go back and understand who John Henry was when he was trying to become a gang member and what made him now. But it just felt like it was just off. It didn't feel like it was connected tightly with who he was now and who he was in the past. And I understand that he became Meat because he didn't want to be a killer and he didn't want to use guns, but it was just very off for me. The character was just boring. I found that his father was way more entertaining, and he called himself B.J. Henry, and he was legendary for something that I guess if you want to watch the film, you'll find out what it is. But that was another thing that I found very very problematic with the movie, is that there was a ton of just dialogue. Like, there was just one-off moments where people were just talking and it really had nothing to do with the plot. At the beginning, there's a table of drug dealers talking about just nonsense things. I can't even remember what they were talking about now because it made no sense. One guy was telling a story, and you could tell that what Will Forbes was trying to go for was more of a like Quentin Tarantino feel to the movie. As you know, Quentin Tarantino is always doing a lot of dialogue, but the dialogue always drives the movie, and if it plays an integral part, even if it doesn't relate immediately, you'll hear it later. It'll come back up later, or you'll see it in the person's actions, the stories that they're telling, and it really brings out who they are. And this movie, it really was just a bunch of one-off stories, and it was stories told by characters that didn't matter. I don't remember any of their names. They didn't really last. So it was like they were going off on these conversations. It was just dumb. Two guys, I should say, were talking about the Human Centipede, and it literally went on for about 2 or 3 minutes. Will Forbes just looks like he was just trying to throw everything at this movie and made everything stick, no matter what you thought about it. There was one scene where it literally took about 2 minutes, and they played almost an entire song, and in that song, like during the time they were playing the song, they were just showing scenes of LA, like cars jumping, and a homeless man by a bridge, and people walking the street. And I'm like, what does this have to do with the movie? This has nothing to do with it. So I'm like watching this film, and literally an hour in, I'm like, yo, there hasn't been a piece of action from John Henry. This is the title of the movie. Why hasn't this guy done anything? And I'm watching it, and I'm like, yo, it's been an hour. He hasn't done anything at all. Like, he waited for people. He talked. He talked to the girl that he rescued, and more talking, and then talk again. And then we cut off to Ludacris's gang talk. Ludacris comes up. Oh my God. Let's talk about Ludacris here. This is one of the weirdest gang leaders I've ever seen. I don't know how this guy is efficient at all. It felt like he was killing more of his own henchmen than he was killing anybody else. Like, it would just be little things where, hey, this wasn't even my fault. Like, I think the top guy, I can't even remember why he killed the first guy, but I think he like hit a dog and messed up his car, and he ended up like burning him for that. And I was like, wait a minute, this is your henchman. How are you building rapport with your team? How are you building morale with your team when you're killing everybody, and it's simple for you to do that? Like, I wouldn't want to work for you. I'd work for your rival. So it made no sense to me. And towards the end, they finally got Terry Crews into some action scenes, and I should say action scene because it kept going back and forth. It was just really disjointed, to the point where literally an hour and 15 minutes into the movie was the first time that he actually did something of relevance. And this is an hour and 30-minute movie, so you have 15 minutes left after that. So I'm going to go ahead and just give John Henry, there's not too much more to say about this. I'm going to give this movie a straight up F. It was not good. I won't watch it again. Fell asleep the first time that I was watching it, and probably about I missed the last 30 minutes, and I really regret that I had to turn it back on and watch it again just to make sure that I could give an accurate review of what this movie was. And yeah, this movie's just straight up F. It wasn't even worth it. Do not watch this movie if you don't have to. If you want to support Terry Crews, go ahead. It's number 2 on Netflix as of today, but trust me, it's because people are watching it. But this movie was trash. Trash bag sandwich. Do not waste your time. The next film is another Netflix original from Adam Sandler's production company, Happy Madison, called The Wrong Missy. It stars Saturday Night Live alum David Spade and Lauren Lapkus, who mainly played a lot of supporting roles in shows like The Orange is the New Black and Crashing on HBO. And this film is directed by Tyler Spindle, who's directed another Happy Madison movie called Father of the Year that I haven't heard anything about it. Nobody's really talked about it. And that one's also on Netflix if you want to check it out. And the premise is about a man who thinks he's invited the woman of his dreams to a work retreat in Hawaii, but realizes too late that he's invited his blind date from hell who has the same name. And this movie is straight up a Adam Sandler movie. If you know one Adam Sandler movie, you kind of know that he falls into a little bit of a cliche with a lot of films that he does. So there definitely some that are funny, some that are really not. But there's ongoing things that happen throughout these movies. You know you're going to see Vanilla Ice. You know you're going to see Rob Schneider. You know David Spade's going to be in it. You know those folks are always going to pop up, and then he also has a couple of other folks that usually jump into his movies as well. And there's always that reoccurring character that's always popping up, and he's doing something funny, and then he's gone, and then he comes back at the end of the movie, and that's usually played by Rob Schneider. And also, there's always one person that nobody likes, but you don't fully hate them, but you could tell that they're up to something mischievous, if you want to use that word. And this movie just follows all those tropes, and I find it to be an average Adam Sandler movie. But I have to say one thing about this movie that was very impressive to me, and that was Lauren Lapkus. Her playing Missy was probably the highlight of this entire movie. She had me dying laughing from the beginning to the end. And she plays an annoying character. So as I could tell you, she was the blind date from hell, and she really played that part at the beginning. She had me rolling with everything she did, and it was like she didn't miss a beat. It was like joke and joke and joke, hit, joke, hit, joke, hit. So she just kept doing it. And after a while in the movie, I felt like it was starting to get a little bit tiring, because she was like almost going at 100 miles per hour and she would not stop. But then when I was getting kind of tired of who she was, the movie went into its second act, and she was still the same person, but she changed for that second act of the movie, and she was still going 100 miles per hour, but it was like a completely new way of going that way. And it was very impressive how she did it. And then during the third act, you see her once again, she just shifts gears, and she's still going 100 miles per hour, but she's maintaining that comedic beat, man. That was just really on point. I think she was literally the highlight of the movie. She's the one person that I would watch this movie again for, because she had me laughing my ass off. I'm talking about, she was doing some things here that, I mean, it was really blowing my mind, like how funny it was. So when I saw that, it kind of reminded me a lot of like Bridesmaids. It was like a mix of Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy. Is like those two characters like melded together, but it really got super annoying. And it just reminded me of the plane scene when she was really antagonized. Melissa McCarthy was really antagonizing the what was it, the air sheriff or the air marshal. And when Kristen Wiig got drunk on the plane, it felt like it was a combination of those two characters into one, and like she just killed it. I'm gonna give this movie right here a C plus, and at first I was gonna go ahead and give it a C minus, maybe even a D plus, because it just followed the regular Adam Sandler tropes as usual. But I'm telling you, Lauren Lapkus, she really stepped up. And I've seen her before in the past, and she always played kind of a more quiet, reserved character. But in this one, she really showed that she has comedic chops, and I give her a ton of credit, man. If she gets any more, just any top roles like this, I'm gonna go see it, because she really knocked it out the park, and she made this movie more interesting to watch. Otherwise, everything else was just plain Adam Sandler movies. You're gonna get a lot of reminiscence to 51st Dates, specifically because they're in Hawaii. But totally fun movie. It was fun. I didn't hate it. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I loved it, but I definitely didn't hate it, and it's something I would watch again. So the last movie I'll be looking at is a VOD film, and for those that don't know what VOD is, that just means video on demand, and I think you could get it at your Redbox. Actually, now that I think about it, the film did start off with Redbox, so it might be their film, which is weird because I didn't know they had their own production company. But the film is called Capone, and it examines the last year of Al Capone's life as he suffers through dementia. And it stars the amazing method actor Tom Hardy, who is probably in my top five actors as of today. And you may recognize him from Dunkirk. He was one of the fighter pilots in the plane. You never get to see his face. And in The Dark Knight Rises as Bane, another film where you don't see his face either. So Tom Hardy is one of my favorite actors. So when I heard that this one was coming out, and I love old timey gangster stuff. So when I heard that this one was coming out and he was going to be playing Capone, I was pretty excited about it. I wanted to see it. It also stars Linda Cardellini, who you might recognize from the 2000 Scooby Doo franchise for whatever reason, and Freaks and Geeks, which is a really popular show during the late 90s. And this film was directed by Josh Trank, who's infamously known for directing the last Fantastic Four movie that did not do very well. And I thought he had a longer resume, but it looks like this was his third film. So that was really surprising, especially since a lot of people are talking about him, and probably not for the best reasons. But this film, I found it to be a very difficult watch as well, and it was a little bit different from it just being a bad movie. I found it to be a very difficult watch because we're looking at Al Capone, but this wasn't like a gangster movie. It was more so a movie about mental health decline, and it's not a fun watch. It wasn't, and it felt like it was very difficult. It was just seeing him go through some of these things. It was almost cringy to see him suffering through this, and it felt like the movie was glamorizing it a little bit. And we'll see his perspective on things, and he'll go back to some gangster moments that happened back in his heyday, and it was just almost glorified violence. But the movie wasn't a straight up violent movie, and it was just very stylized, and it looked really good. I just never imagined somebody that's going through dementia, and he also suffered from syphilis. If you folks didn't know this, he suffered from syphilis, and during the time that he was suffering through it, penicillin had just been discovered. So they were able to treat him, but by that time the syphilis had already gotten into his brain, and he started pretty much just reverting back to a 12-year-old almost. And you're seeing him revert back to that, and you're seeing him dealing with dementia and seeing things that aren't there. And there's a lot of that going on, and it felt like it was almost being glamorized, and I found that to be a little bit bothersome because it's a serious thing, and it's not something that I can really enjoy as entertainment. And it felt like it was just being abused a little bit. Also, there was a couple there was a couple of scenes in the movie where they showed that Al Capone was literally dropping deuces on himself. He did it on a couple of occasions, and it felt like the second time that it happened, it was like they were trying to make a joke out of it. It was like it was funny, and he was doing it. You see his face. He's like, oh, it's just letting it out, and it just felt really weird because it's like this shouldn't be funny. You know what I'm saying? This is kind of sad to see somebody going through this. And as I mentioned before, it just felt like they were just kind of like making light of it. And he's walking around with a diaper, and it's real. That's what actually happened, but it still felt like it was just too much, and it felt like it was borderline made as a joke, and I just found it to be a really hard watch. And spoiler right now coming up, so if you want to skip ahead for a little bit, go ahead. But there was a scene here with Matt Dillon, and it really just I noticed things that are off in a movie, and Matt Dillon gets a phone call stating that something happened to Al Capone, and in the scene where he gets the phone call, he's what's the word I'm looking for? He's he is becoming one with a female in the room, right? So he gets the phone call and he heads down to Miami, and he's there having conversations with Al Capone. He's like, hey man, I know you're not doing good, but I'm here for you and all this stuff. And then you later on realize that this character was never really there. This was a figment of his imagination. So I'm thinking to myself, so why did they play the scene where he was having sex with this woman and then the phone rings and he's answering it? It just felt like, what, Al Capone made that up in his head too? It just didn't fit, So the movie is not a gangster movie. So if you're expecting to see that, you're going to be sadly disappointed. It's more of a film of seeing him decline. A couple of other hard things to watch was actually the makeup that they did on Tom Hardy. It looked really rough. Like, it looked like they were making a monster. And I understand that with the mental decline, a couple of things were happening. His eyes were getting really bloodshot. But I'm talking about his skin. And I'm not talking about towards the end where he started getting like these abrasions. It was just like the skin just didn't look right. It looked fake. And it really took me out of like seeing him as Al Capone. It was Tom Hardy in a mask. And as I mentioned before, Tom Hardy is one of my favorite actors. But in this movie, it was just very rough seeing him in this. It felt like I was watching a more amateur actor doing what he was doing. Don't get me wrong, he played the part well, but it just felt like the way that the character was written, it didn't fit Tom Hardy. It didn't fit him. And then his voice was really, he changed his voice to sound really, they're talking like this. So it was really hard to understand what he was saying. And that really makes, a difference when you're watching a movie, because there was no relatability to the character. I didn't care for anybody in this movie. And I don't care for Al Capone because he did a lot of vile things in his life, and I didn't feel any sympathy. And I think towards the end of the movie, they were trying to go for that sympathetic kind of role, trying to really lure people in with that, but it just didn't work. The flashbacks didn't work. His syphilitic mental projections didn't work either to me. So this movie, I'm going to go ahead and just give it a D+. It looked really good, but that's pretty much about it. I didn't like the plot, didn't like the acting as much, and just didn't like the overall story of it. The tone was just way off, and it felt like they were trying to bring too many layers into it, and it just didn't work. So D+ for this one. I would say skip this one. Hey guys, so thanks for joining the show for today. That's all I got. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you go ahead and watch these movies with caution. John Henry, I suggest you avoid it. Definitely do The Wrong Missy for a good Friday night laugh. Al Capone, more of a heavy movie. Just watch it when you feel like you want to watch something heavy. But in the meantime, continue to keep liking, sharing, subscribing. Last week I told you guys to smoke screen. I meant to smoke signal. If you know how to do a smoke signal, please smoke signal this show. And also fax it. Fax it if you can. It doesn't matter. Just get it out there, and just continue to keep supporting. And I'm going to keep doing my thing. I really appreciate everybody coming out, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.